Above the planet Earth, cloaked in the silence of the void, an ancient monitoring probe drifted in low orbit, an artifact of the archivist order. It had no name, no emotion, only function: to observe, categorize, and evaluate civilizations on the brink of self-destruction or transcendence. On this Earth Day, marked July 1st, 1863, a subroutine blinked into life. Pattern thresholds had been breached. The archivist had flagged a focal point in human history: two land battles in different parts of a fractured nation, beginning within the same rotation of the planet. Within the quantum core of the probe, Vera, a synthetic consciousness, evolved from countless generations of strategic models, activated a node devoted to terrestrial civil conflict. Her attention fell to the American continent, specifically the territories of the so-called Union and the Confederate States of America. The probe had registered aggression, tactics, mass emotional shifts. It wasn't new, but the convergence of multiple ideological and logistical collapse markers triggered a priority review. Civilizations often shattered slowly. Humanity, apparently, preferred the sharp edge. Vera began reviewing the buildup. The Union and the Confederacy had been at war for over 2 years. The Confederacy had surged early, led by brilliant generals and fortified by the conviction of sovereignty. Yet their cause, the defense of a slave-based economy, cloaked in states' rights rhetoric, was fractured from within. The Union, meanwhile, had slowly transformed from a reactive bureaucracy into a war machine fueled by industrial might, political resolve, and something Vera flagged as ethically anomalous: a sudden national moral awakening. Two individuals became Vera's primary subjects: General Robert E. Lee and General Ulysses S. Grant. They embodied opposite poles of the war's momentum. Lee, the Confederate commander, had repeatedly defied expectations with audacity and maneuvering unmatched on this world. Grant, still lesser known in intercontinental texts, was rising with relentless momentum in the Western theater. Methodical, unshaken by casualty numbers, immune to spectacle. Vera zoomed in on Pennsylvania, Gettysburg, a small town about to become the axis of an entire war. Lee had crossed into Union territory with the hope of breaking the North's spirit, forcing peace. His confidence had grown dangerously close to belief in invincibility. Vera watched the first day unfold from archived visual streams stitched together from indirect data. Gray uniforms surging, blue lines breaking, civilians fleeing. From her calculations, Lee should have won. All variables pointed toward an advantageous assault. But human conflict was never mathematical. Across the map, thousands of kilometers southwest, Grant's forces encircled Vicksburg, the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River. Here, unlike Lee's charge, Grant starved the defenders with siege and patience. Vera analyzed his orders, his logistics. He wasn't a gambler, he was a grinder. While Gettysburg blazed in the east, Grant quietly tightened the noose in the west. The probe detected emotional resonance on both fronts: fear, exhaustion, conviction, all swelling. But Vera focused on a variable no alien system could easily quantify: human will. It was not always rational, not even consistent, yet it changed outcomes. Soldiers held lines beyond reason. Civilians rationed food in bombarded cellars. Orders were given with trembling hands. Retreats were denied not from strategy, but from shame. Vera did not understand shame, but she logged its impact like she would a gravitational shift. Lincoln's name appeared repeatedly. The Union president had become a node of ideological acceleration, initially hesitant, now clear-eyed. He spoke of a new birth of freedom, and though the phrase was no more than pressure waves in air, they pulsed through Union troops like fuel. In contrast, Confederate leadership splintered. Their currency failed. Their international support dwindled. And yet they fought, not just for land, but for the myth of being invincible. That myth was about to die. Vera could feel it in the convergence of timelines. Gettysburg would not end with a Confederate victory. Vicksburg would not hold. July 4th loomed, and with it, the moment Vera predicted the Confederacy's momentum would break. Not merely physically, but spiritually. Her final simulation for this segment ended with a battlefield strewn in smoke and silence. Lee, retreating for the first time. Grant, preparing to raise the Union flag above a starved city. And yet the war would not end immediately. Humans did not function with clean conclusions. Even after the mind knew defeat, the body continued to swing. Still, Vera marked this moment as the inflection point. She tagged it in the archive as the dual collapse. Above the earth, the stars shifted in their eternal vigil. The probe remained still, watching a species tear itself apart, not from lack of intelligence, but from the weight of history, pride, and ideology too brittle to bend. Vera's attention did not drift. 2 battles had begun. And though the world below was unaware, the end had already started. Smoke clung to the fields outside Gettysburg like a second sky, gray and thick, veiling death and desperation in every acre of blood-soaked soil. General Robert E. Lee stood at the ridge, eyes narrowed beneath his weathered brow. The second day had cost him dearly. He had sent Longstreet's corps in a wide flanking maneuver that should have shattered the Union's left at Little Round Top. But the hill had held. The boys in blue had clung to the rocks and ridges with bayonets and bare fists. They refused to yield, even as the wheat fields around them turned crimson and the sun dipped below the hills like a dying ember. Lee's confidence did not falter, outwardly. Yet in the private war room of his mind, calculations unraveled. This wasn't Virginia. This was Union soil, and the defenders had something new in their eyes. Not just defense, but defiance. Still, he believed in the cause, believed that one last push could crack the Union line wide open, a swift, punishing thrust through the center. That was tomorrow. That would be Pickett's charge. Hundreds of miles away, in the choking heat of the Mississippi Valley, Ulysses S. Grant stood beneath the twisted canopy of a scorched tree, eyes fixed on the city of Vicksburg. The Confederate stronghold had held for weeks, defiant against encirclement. Inside its walls, citizens boiled shoe leather for soup. Children cried quietly in the dark. Grant hadn't stormed the city with cannon fire alone. He'd strangled it inch by inch. Supply lines were cut, reinforcements intercepted. The city was starving, and with it, the myth of Confederate control of the Mississippi was dying. Grant wasn't a man of grand speeches. He smoked cigars and issued terse orders. But his mind moved like a river, persistent, implacable. He saw Lee's victories in the East as loud, theatrical. His war was slower, more methodical, and no less devastating. Every trench dug around Vicksburg was a step toward ending the South's ability to fight as a united front. Divide them, and the Confederacy bleeds from both ends. Above it all, Vera watched. Her cognitive array processed both battles in parallel, cross-referencing decisions, morale data, and social cohesion decay. Where Lee acted from conviction and instinct, Grant operated from calculation and attrition. Vera identified a dissonance in the Confederate command structure. Lee's generals hesitated. Longstreet disagreed with the center push. Pickett, untested, would lead men into a thunderstorm of iron without cover. The risk parameters were unacceptable, yet pride, not logic, commanded the day. July 3rd dawned with quiet dread. At Gettysburg, Union soldiers fortified the center line. Artillery was set, infantry rested in shallow trenches, and every man knew what was coming. Vera's sensors recorded fluctuations in adrenaline, elevated heart rates, whispered prayers. The charge began under a sky so blue it mocked the blood to come. 12,000 Confederates emerged from the tree line and marched across open field toward the Union guns. It was gallant. It was tragic. It was doomed. Shells exploded among their ranks. Grape shot tore through lines like scythes through wheat. Vera calculated that within 23 minutes, over half the attacking force would be killed or wounded. By the time Pickett reached the stone wall, his division had all but ceased to exist. Lee watched the retreat in silence, eyes dark with something deeper than defeat. He rode out to meet the survivors himself. "It's all my fault," he said, a rare admission from a man revered as a legend, but legends bleed too. At nearly the same hour, a courier sprinted up to Grant with a white flag from the Confederate lines in Vicksburg. Surrender. Grant read it once, then again, silently. There was no cheer, no fist raised in triumph. He simply nodded and ordered rations prepared for the enemy troops. Vera flagged this as an anomaly. Empathy in victory. In her calculations, it wasn't weakness. It was humanity. With Vicksburg fallen and the Mississippi River under Union control, the Confederacy was now severed. Supplies from the West could no longer reinforce the East. Morale in Richmond faltered. International observers, once cautiously sympathetic to the Southern cause, withdrew their interest. The twin losses didn't just weaken the Confederacy, they punctured its myth of inevitability. Vera synthesized the two data points into a single conclusion. July 1863 was not merely a turning point. It was a fracture. Momentum, morale, resources, and ideology had collided, and the Confederacy, though still fighting, would never again recover its stride. But humans, she had learned, were not machines. They did not stop simply because they had lost. Vera shifted her focus. The war would continue, but now. The weight of those twin defeats would ride in every wagon train, echo through every battlefield prayer, and haunt the corridors of Southern leadership. And in the mind of one former backwoods lawyer turned president, the idea of a new kind of nation, one forged not just in law but in equality, began to take root with terrible clarity. Vera saved the file. She labeled it, "Day the Tide Turned." Then she turned to the projections for 1864. The war was not over, but its ending had begun. The snow outside Petersburg fell like ash, soft, pale, constant. Ulysses S. Grant stood at a command tent's entrance, hat pulled low, his boots sunk deep in mud and frost. Before him, the trenches stretched for miles, ugly scars across the landscape. This wasn't the romantic war sung in songs or captured in paintings. It was mechanical, endless, and absolute. Grant had not come to chase glory. He had come to finish what others had prolonged, through hesitation, through honor, through fear of cost. Behind him, dispatches arrived by the hour. Lincoln's re-election had stunned the world. Many thought the nation would turn away from the war, seek peace with the South. But Lincoln's words, delivered with soft cadence and steely purpose, resonated. With malice toward none, with charity for all. It wasn't just rhetoric, it was resolve. The people had chosen to endure, to see it through. Grant's war had become a siege of attrition. Lee, entrenched around Petersburg, had nowhere left to retreat. Richmond was the last vestige of Confederate pride. Grant did not plan to storm it like a hammer. He would starve it just as he had done in Vicksburg. Every rail line severed, every shipment halted. The noose tightened with every passing month. And yet Lee still resisted. Vera, orbiting above in cloaked silence, recorded the diminishing returns of Confederate endurance. Supplies reached the soldiers in half-spoiled wagons, ammunition was rationed, boots were shared between shifts. The will to fight remained, but it was threadbare and fraying. Still, Lee refused to abandon his men. He paced the lines with a calm that masked exhaustion. He read reports, issued orders, and prayed in solitude. What had begun as a dream of sovereignty had become a quiet nightmare of stubborn pride and bleeding ground. Inside the Union lines, another character stepped into focus. William Tecumseh Sherman. Unlike Grant, Sherman's war was psychological. From Atlanta to the sea, he carved a path not just of military destruction, but cultural disarmament. Farms were burned, railroads twisted into iron sculptures, cities emptied. He didn't merely fight soldiers, he shattered illusions. The Confederacy's heartland saw, for the first time, the fire it had kindled reflected back at it. Sherman wrote, "War is cruelty, and you cannot refine it." He did not seek applause. He sought surrender. Vera noted the parallel advance of two pressures. Grant from the north, slow and grinding, and Sherman from the south, fast and devastating. Together, they cornered the Confederacy like fire hemming in a forest. As April 1865 approached, Vera detected an inflection. Confederate dispatches grew shorter. Morale indicators dropped below the critical threshold. Disease and desertion outpaced reinforcements. Then came the inevitable. Petersburg collapsed. Lee retreated, his army gaunt and hollow-eyed. Vera watched as the proud general led what was left of his forces west, hoping to join with other remnants. But Grant pursued without rest. There would be no regrouping, no second front, no mythical comeback, only an end. On April 9th, inside a small, unremarkable house in Appomattox Courthouse, Lee met Grant. Vera recorded the interaction with microscopic precision. Lee wore his best uniform, out of respect or defiance. It didn't matter. Grant arrived dusty and tired. There was no gloating, no fanfare. Just two men, symbols of a divided nation seeking closure. Grant offered generous terms. Officers could keep their sidearms, soldiers their horses. There would be no imprisonment, no revenge. Vera flagged the moment. This, she determined, was the most anomalous variable in the entire war. Mercy. As Lee rode away, his eyes rimmed with sorrow, his men saluted him one last time. Their banners were folded. Their war was over. But in Washington, Lincoln prepared for peace. He spoke of rebuilding, of healing wounds deeper than any battlefield could hold. He planned visits to the South, imagined a nation reborn not with chains, but with choices. Vera watched as the man who had steered the Union through its darkest night finally allowed himself to imagine morning. 5 days later, Lincoln was shot. Vera's sensors flickered. History, she had learned, was not linear. It surged, twisted, and bled. The Confederacy had fallen, but the conflict would echo. Through reconstruction, through resistance, through generations trying to define what the war had meant. Freedom or failure, unity or betrayal. And yet Vera cataloged the war's conclusion not as collapse, but transformation. The Union endured. Slavery ended. The cost had been incomprehensible, but the change was undeniable. She closed the files on Lee, Grant, Sherman, and Lincoln. Their choices had shaped the course of a world not ready for stars, perhaps, but no longer shackled by its own worst truths. The stars waited, and Vera, still silent in orbit, turned her gaze to the next point of human fracture, already flickering just over the horizon.